For 30 years, almost nothing we know about the most important man in human history. No miracles, no sermons, no followers, just silence. Then, at exactly age 30, everything changed. Jesus of Nazareth stepped into public life and started a movement that would reshape the entire world. But why 30? Why not 20? Why not 18, when he was already a grown man by ancient standards? Stick with me, because the answer isn't random. It's hidden in ancient law, royal history, and a number that shows up again and again in Scripture. Today we're digging into one of the most overlooked details in the Gospels, the age of Jesus, when he began his public ministry. It's mentioned almost in passing, one verse, one line, but that single detail connects to centuries of Jewish tradition, kingship, and priesthood. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the number 30 was not a coincidence. Let's get into it. Our first clue comes from the book of Numbers, way back in the Old Testament. God gave Moses very specific instructions about the Levites, the priestly tribe responsible for serving in the tabernacle, the portable place of worship the Israelites carried through the wilderness. And the requirement was clear. Priests could not begin their service until they reached the age of 30. Numbers chapter 4 repeats this rule multiple times. For different priestly clans, the same threshold appears over and over, 30 years old and above. Why does this matter for Jesus? Because later in the New Testament, specifically in the book of Hebrews, Jesus is described in priestly language as a high priest who intercedes for humanity. If the author of Luke's Gospel was aware of this priestly tradition, and as an educated writer familiar with Jewish law, he almost certainly was, then presenting Jesus as beginning his ministry at 30 would immediately signal something to a Jewish audience. This man is stepping into priestly maturity, on schedule, right on time. Let's zoom out from religious law for a moment and think culturally. In the first century world, both Jewish and Greco-Roman, age 30 carried real social weight. It was not just an adult. It was the age associated with full maturity, wisdom, and the credibility needed to lead, teach, or hold public office. When a rabbi, a teacher, a public figure claiming authority showing up at 20 or 22 years old might have raised eyebrows, but showing up at 30, they will say, this person has lived well, this person has depth, this person deserves to be heard. So when Jesus begins healing the sick, teaching in synagogues, and gathering disciples at 30, he's stepping into public life at precisely the age his culture considered credible for that kind of role. Now here's the actual textual evidence. This is not just inference. Luke's Gospel states it plainly. In Luke chapter 3, verse 23, right after Jesus is baptized, the text says, he was about 30 years of age when he began his ministry. It's a small detail, tucked between the baptism and the genealogy of Jesus that follows. But biblical authors were deliberate. Luke did not need to include an age at all, but he chose to. And in a gospel written partly to establish Jesus' credibility and legitimacy to a broader audience, that detail does real work. It tells the reader, this is a mature, established figure, not a young, untested wanderer. Here's a detail a lot of people miss entirely. In the Old Testament, King David, the most celebrated king in Israel's history, began his reign at age 30. 2 Samuel chapter 5 states this directly. And Jesus is not just a teacher in the Gospels. He's repeatedly presented as the heir to David's throne, the promised king from David's line who would restore Israel and establish an eternal kingdom. So when Jesus begins his public ministry, his own kind of reign, at the exact same age David began his, it's very unlikely to be coincidence. It's a quiet signal to anyone familiar with Jewish scripture. This is the true heir stepping into his calling. Priest, teacher, king, all pointing to the same number. Now, to be fair and balanced here, historians and scholars do note something important. The Gospels were not written as modern biographies obsessed with precise dates. Ancient authors frequently used round, symbolically meaningful numbers rather than exact record-keeping. So while 30 carries deep theological and symbolic weight, tied to priesthood, kingship, and cultural maturity, many scholars treat it as a meaningful number within the text, rather than a rigorously verified historical fact in the modern sense. That does not make it less powerful. It just means the meaning may matter more than the mathematics. So here's a challenge for you before you scroll away. Look at your own life right now. Are you waiting for the right time to start something meaningful, a calling, a project, a change? Jesus did not rush his purpose. He waited until the moment aligned with maturity, credibility, and readiness, and then he moved decisively. This week, I want you to ask yourself, what am I preparing for right now, even if it does not look like much yet? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to know it. If this kind of deep dive into biblical history and hidden details is something you enjoy, this channel is exactly the place for you. Hit like if this taught you something new, subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive, and turn on notifications, because we're uncovering another detail hiding in plain sight. See you in the next one.